Guys, I think I made a mistake. I wore the best shirt possible for this video in my last video. And I could just wear it again, but it's dirty and I don't feel like doing that. So the s'mores frappuccino is back at Starbucks, and you know what that means. It is camping season. Camping is by far one of my favorite activities, if not my favorite activity to do. Sadly, I still only go a few times a year, but it is one of my favorite things in this world. And another favorite thing in this world are horror movies that are based around camping. And I've looked up my fair share of lists online of like the best camping films and the best films set in the woods and things like that. But I wanted to come on here and share my curated list of my favorite camping movies, the ones that I like to watch in spring, summer to get in the mood for summer vacations, for summer camping, things like that. And I literally have something for everyone. I have camping in tents, I have camping in cabins, I have camping in RVs, we got deserts in the woods, we have black comedy films, we have true horror movies, we have supernatural type horror, and we also have like realistic survival horror. So I really have something for everyone in this video. I tried to encapsulate all different types of camping. Also, huge thank you to Shudder for sponsoring this video. Shudder is for fans of all things horror, suspense, thriller. I was gonna say thriller, but like maybe that's its own genre, I don't know. They have movies, shows, exclusives, originals on there, so they have something for everyone. It's completely ad-free and you can view it on many types of technology, such as your phone, your laptop, TV, of course, your Xbox or other gaming systems. I've had Shudder for a very long time at this point. I think probably almost a year, and they always have such good hidden gems. I like to pop on the Shudder TV option. They have like a couple different genres depending what you're in the mood for, whether it be like slasher films. That's usually my favorite to put on because it's a really cool way to like jump into a film that maybe you've never heard of and see how you're feeling. And just if you don't know what else to watch, just pop that on. So you can try Shudder for 30 days for free if you go to shudder.com and use my code POSSESSED30. I will have a link to it down below. After the 30 days, it's only $5.99 a month, which I think is such a steal for the amount of content that you're getting. Or you could do the $56.99 a year, which is what I like to do. It's completely affordable and you get unlimited access to Shudder, which has tons and tons of horror content. So if you like my channel, you should sign up for Shudder because you're gonna like the horror content they got on there. Now let's move on to the actual camping movies. Like I said, some are camping, some are cabins, some are RV. Most of them do take place in the woods, but there's a ton of variety in this list, but they all have one thing in common, and that is the summer trip turned deadly, which is kind of what I look for when I want like a true summer camping vibe movie that's like, you know, summer. First up, I have to talk about Cabin in the Woods. This came out in 2011. It's actually a black comedy. It stars Chris Hemsworth randomly. I mean, that was back in the day. It's directed by Drew Goddard. I want to say Gooden because of Drew Gooden, but anyway, Drew Goddard directed this. It's actually his directorial debut, and I feel like this movie deserves a spot on this list, even if it's not a true camping style movie. It does follow a group of 5 friends that go on a not a camping trip, it's like a trip to a cabin in the woods, obviously based on the title. They go to a cabin and they're all kind of stereotypical tropes in and of themselves, the characters that is. It has a lot of commentary about horror movies in general, which was a huge surprise to I think a lot of people in the community, and I think that's why people really like it, because it's a play on the traditional cabin type horror movies and like the traditional like tropes that you see in a lot of horror movies. It's very self-aware and pokes fun at its own genre, which I really liked. I'm sure most of you guys have seen it, but just in case some of you haven't, I don't want to say too much more. Just, you know, it's probably not what you think it's going to be when you go into the movie. I was very confused for the first like 20 to 30 minutes, but even still to this day, I like to rewatch this movie for the first 20 to 30 minutes because it's very traditional, campy camping. Some of these are going to be very obvious choices to be on a list and are on many other lists, but there's a reason for that. It's because they are iconic camping films. So the next one is Cabin Fever. Bet you didn't see that one coming. Obviously, again, not set in tents, like not tent camping technically, but they are in a cabin in the woods. So this movie is directed by Eli Roth, who is very much a hit or miss type of director for me. I'm not a huge fan of the Hostel films, but I really liked Green Inferno. I think he does gore very, very well because I obviously love Cabin Fever and Inglourious Basterds, which is not a horror movie, but the gore in it was very disturbing to me. It really bothered me when I saw the movie for some reason. Cabin Fever is definitely not for the weak-stomached. There is tons and tons of gore they use for shock factor, and a lot of it is completely unreal. I mean, there's a few scenes that come to mind when we think of Cabin Fever, those of us who have seen it, and obviously they just don't make sense logically why that would even happen, but it does. It's for shock factor, and that's one thing that he does do in all his movies, which again, hit or miss for me, but in Cabin Fever, to me, it's effective, especially with the setting. I think that's why I really like this movie, because it is in the woods and, you know, that kind of setting that I really like. But it's very gory and disgusting and a lot of bodily bleh. I'll tell you a little bit about the plot in case you haven't seen it. It is an early 2000s film, which is, again, one of my favorite decades for horror, so love that. It basically follows a group of friends going to a cabin in the woods. Very stereotypical, very generic of a story. They end up running into a man that's like obviously very, very sick, and he ends up dying and landing in the river, which kind of contaminates the water. And then, of course, disease is spreading, so it's very, very gross. There's actually a sound mixer that worked on this movie who had this real life flesh-eating disease back in the day, and he says that the makeup, the special effects makeup and everything that they did in the film is highly accurate, so that kind of makes it even more gross. The remake of Cabin Fever. Easily one of the worst remakes I have ever seen. It's also done by Eli Roth, which is just highly confusing. I think it was just too soon for him to remake it, and it was unnecessary because I think it was made in like 2002 or something like that. It just wasn't needed right now anyway. Like, wait another decade maybe to remake it and then also make it better. The next one is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a very generic like favorite to have, I feel, but it's easily one of my favorite slashers, and that is Friday the 13th. Obviously this had to go on it. Camp Crystal Lake. The shirt I wore in my last video that I wish I wore in this video. Camping. But it honestly would not be a camping movie list without Friday the 13th, so I had to put it in here. And it is one of my favorites. I rewatch this one almost every summer because I truly love the camping vibes. I mean, it's a summer camp. It follows a group of camp counselors that are like setting up for the summer, so there's no kids there yet. The budget for Friday the 13th was actually pretty low, I would say. It was around $500,000, and that's because a lot of the set was already there because this is an actual camp that is run in New Jersey, so they only had to construct the bathroom set, so everything else was already there. So they only spent $500,000. They ended up making $39 million at the box office. Also, another one I want to recommend is the 2009 kind of remake sequel to Friday the 13th. It has actual tent camping in it, so if you want tent camping horror, check out the 2009 remake of Friday the 13th. I really like it. It's very cheesy. Next one is also one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm seeing a pattern here. A lot of my favorite movies of all time also have to do with camping. The Blair Witch Project. Again, I don't think it would be like a woodsy summer camping film without The Blair Witch Project. It is just such a classic in my book. The scenery, the setting, the actors and everything. It just makes it feel so realistic, like you were actually hiking through the woods with them on this journey to find the Blair Witch and film this documentary. It just very much has those that camping feel that you look for in a horror camping film. How many times am I gonna say camping? Make it a drinking game. Take a shot every time I say camping. Don't do that. I think this movie is highly successful because of its super, super low budget. They had to do more subtle scares, but they are there. I think some people don't like this movie because it's a little boring or not as scary as modern horror is or anything like that. But to me, this movie is so iconic because of its subtle scares that were so effective with so little. Like, their resources were so small and their budget was so small. In fact, it was actually in the Guinness Book of World Records. Let me stumble over my words some more. It was in the Guinness Book of Records because of their budget to box office ratio. It was nuts. Their budget was around $60,000, and in fact they actually returned camera equipment at the end of filming to make back some of their budget. So their budget ended up being around $60,000, and they made $248 million for this film. I think what really made it successful was the marketing. They marketed this as kind of a real documentary almost like real found footage, because it was one of the first of its kind. And they also cast actors who had never acted in the past, so they weren't known people, and the mom of the actress who plays Heather actually received letters of like condolences for what had happened to her daughter. I also really like that they used the real names of the actors. This is something that I've seen in other found footage type movies, and I feel like that just makes it a little bit more effective, especially when you're working with such a small budget and not real actors. I hate saying that, but you know, like actors who have never acted before, such as in Paranormal Activity. In the first film, they used the first names of the real people as their character names. They also did a lot of techniques to make their reactions more genuine. They had unscripted scares that they would do. The actors didn't always know what was going to happen next in the filmmaking process. They did actually believe the Blair Witch mythology was real and not fabricated by the director. And they also, throughout filming, I think they filmed this in 8 days, and as they progressed filming, they received less and less food, so they would become a little bit more disgruntled and more like agitated with each other to create more of that tension. It's just an amazing film for so many reasons. I know it gets a bad rap sometimes, but I think a lot of horror fans really love it. And obviously the setting, it had to go in my favorite camping horror movies. Next up is another black comedy, and that is Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. This was one of my favorite movies for so long. Obviously, as you see more and more films, they kind of, you know, scoot their way out, but it was one of my favorites for a very, very long time. I love this movie still to this day. This also takes place in the woods and follows a group of stereotypical young folk just wanting to party, going up to the woods to party, you know? Except this doesn't really follow the group of friends necessarily. It mainly focuses on a hillbilly duo of Tucker and Dale, which they are hilarious. I'm very picky when it comes to comedy. It just has to hit right with movies, and especially with black comedy or like horror comedy. I'm very, very picky, so I found this movie really funny. Obviously it's not gonna be everyone's cup of tea, but I really like it, and it does have those like summer camping vibes, but also it's a lighter movie, so if you're like a beginner into horror, this might be a good option. Also, I do want to say though, with that, there's a lot of gore. Sorry, there's a loud truck outside. There is a lot of gore with it, but because the movie is so lighthearted, it's not like that disturbing or like in a horror setting necessarily. It's just like kind of there to add to the comedy of it all. So I think it's effective. I don't know. Next up, we have Wolf Creek, which is a 2005 Australian horror film. And this is less about camping and it's more about a road trip, like a summer road trip through the Australian outback. So it's obviously set in like a desert rural area instead of like woods, but to me it still has that like summer vacation theme that kind of goes along with horror camping films, so I had to put it in here. Now this is based on a true story, but it's actually loosely inspired by the murders in Australia of Ivan Milat, I think that's how you pronounce his name, in the 90s. So it's not a direct recreation of his murders or anything. It didn't even take place in the outback. I think it took place closer to Sydney. But the character of Mick Taylor is loosely based around Ivan Milat. So this follows a group of friends, obviously, on a little road trip, and they decide to hike through Wolf Creek National Park in Australia, and their car breaks down and they end up getting help from local bushman Mick Taylor, who seems very genuine at first, like very nice, like a very nice man, and that's why they grow to trust him and have him help them out. But the movie does get very disturbing. It is kind of one of those slasher type movies that's like realistic horror, but it definitely still feels like a summer vacation type movie, so I decided to include it in this list. Next we have another international film of Eden Lake. This is a 2008 British horror film. So this movie follows a couple on a romantic weekend getaway to a remote lake house, and they soon realize that they are not alone there. They stumble across these teens who end up becoming very aggressive towards them, and things obviously escalate from there, and I would recommend not watching the trailer to this movie. I think that they show way too much of the film. It's almost the whole film showed in the trailer, so avoid that at all costs if possible, and don't watch that. Just try to go in as blind as possible. I think it's a great gem of a horror movie set in the woods and would highly, highly recommend it. The characters are believable, and it is more of a realistic survival type horror film instead of supernatural, so if that's more your speed, then I think you would definitely really like this film. So next up we have the 2013 Evil Dead remake. The reason why I chose this one is because it is my favorite Evil Dead film in the franchise. Obviously you could watch the original one too, that it also takes place in the woods in a cabin. I feel like it's very, very campy though, so if you're looking for more like true horror, then I would watch the 2013 remake. So it follows 5 friends go into a cabin in the woods. We see a pattern here, but they are going to the woods and to this cabin to help their friend come off of drugs. So there is like more of a backstory. It's not just 5 friends going to party, you know, it's actually quite the opposite. Of course, they find the Book of the Dead in the cabin and they awaken kind of the evil spirits that are out in the woods amongst them. Obviously, this movie is very, very gory. Like there's a lot of shock factor in there when it comes to the gore, so just be prepared for that. But I think what makes it really effective is because they used mostly practical effects for all of the gore. They did this to kind of honor Sam Raimi, who did the practical effects in the 1982 Evil Dead. And honestly, if a movie uses practical effects, it automatically gets my respect, because I just love when movies go to that instead of relying so much on CGI, because I feel like in today's horror it's just easier to go that route instead of the practical effects. But I live for some practical effects, man. I actually did a little Halloween tutorial back when this was released on my main channel, so if you want to watch that, go for it. But I think it was one of my first Halloween tutorials I've ever done, so it's not great, but it started kind of the whole Halloween tutorial trend on my main channel, so check that out. It's really cringy. Next we have The Hills Have Eyes. This is one that came out in 2006 when I was in high school, and I just remember rewatching this a ton in high school. And this one's a little bit different as it follows a family going on vacation by RV. So if tent camping or cabin camping isn't for you, we got an RV movie in here. They're actually going to San Diego. They're driving to San Diego, but their car breaks down in the desert, so it also takes place in the desert, which is again something a little different versus the other movies on the list taking place in the woods. They end up in an area where they did nuclear testing previously, so there are these mutated cannibalistic people there that are kind of hunting them in this desert, and it's pretty graphic, pretty disturbing, so just be warned. They did use a lot of prosthetics and practical effects in this movie, but they did CGI some of the mutations on the actors, especially the children. However, the mutations in the beginning of the film, there's like this montage of photos of real life mutations, and those aren't actually caused by nuclear reasons or anything. That was actually photos of mutations caused by the use of Agent Orange in Vietnam. And the last movie I wanted to include on this list, we gotta have one more mid-2000s cheese horror film in this list. Like, it just wouldn't be complete without, I think, one more. The House of Wax. Yes, the 2005 remake of the original House of Wax. This is one that's kind of, like I said, I don't like using the word guilty pleasure, but it's not the best film. I mean, Paris Hilton is in fact in it. Let me just say her screaming is comedy in and of itself. This one has a lot of different things going on with it. Obviously they end up near a town where there's this wax museum, and then it gets like kind of gory and cool. Like, I like that it turns into kind of a traditional mid-2000s cheesy slasher type of movie. But there is some camping in there, and I just want to throw it in for that reason, because to me that, you know, is enough. There are tons of other camping movies out there that I could continue to just add on to this list that I do watch, but I thought I'd just keep it at 10 just to make it easy. If you want to share your favorite camping films down below, I would love to add some to my list, because I'm always looking for a good camping horror movie. And also make sure you check out Shudder.com in the description down below and use my code POSSESSED30 for 30-day free trial. You will not regret it. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.